persona, but when an individual becomes so entirely identified with it that they mistake the mask for their authentic essence. It occurs when the mask ceases to be a garment you put on and becomes the skin you cannot remove. The persona is a mask of the collective psyche, a mask that feigns individuality, making others and oneself believe that one is truly individual, whereas one is simply acting a role through which the collective psyche speaks. Consider that carefully. It's not a role you consciously invented. It is a script written by something far larger than you. Societal expectations, familial demands, and the accumulated weight of everyone who required you to be manageable and quiet. The child who becomes excessively, compulsively kind is almost never a child who selected gentleness from a position of profound security. Far more often, that child discovered very early that authentic existence carried a terrifying cost. They learned that expressing a real need produced anxiety in their caregivers, that anger was dangerous, that making demands threatened their security, and that taking up too much emotional space was unsafe. And so the child adapted. They became agreeable, helpful, and exceptionally quiet, the one who never added to the household's burdens. Because this adaptation worked, because it produced warmth, relief, and conditional approval from those they depended upon, it calcified into their permanent identity. By adulthood, it is no longer recognized as a calculated defense strategy. It is felt as core character. This is the fundamental reality you must confront, the distinct possibility that what you call your kindness originated not in altruistic virtue, but in the instinct for emotional survival. Recognizing this does not mean you are broken, it means you are human. But it does mean that your kindness deserves rigorous psychological examination rather than uncritical protection. Consider a simple internal practice. The next time you are asked to say yes to a request, a demand on your energy, or an invitation you wish to decline, pause before you answer. You do not need to alter your response immediately. Simply pause long enough to inquire within. Where is this answer coming from? Is there a felt sense of genuine willingness and an authentic desire to give? Or is there a subtle somatic tightening, a faint anxiety, a background hum asking, what will happen if I say no? That anxiety is not your moral conscience speaking. It is the voice of your persona, the ancient psychological structure that learned decades ago that your safety depends on your absolute agreeableness. You cannot dismantle what you refuse to observe. Learning to witness this mechanism in real time is where true psychological liberation begins. Yet, identifying the persona is merely the initial step. A far more pressing question, one to which I devoted my life's work, is what becomes of everything the persona displaces. What happens to every authentic impulse that gets smoothed over, every unspoken refusal that is swallowed, and every sharp truth softened into something palatable? That psychological material does not simply evaporate. It goes somewhere. And where it settles dictates far more about your life than the pleasant surface your persona works so tirelessly to maintain. Whatever is pushed below the threshold of consciousness does not cease to exist. It relocates. It moves from the realm where you can examine it and make deliberate, conscious choices into the dark realm of the unconscious, where it operates upon you without your knowledge or consent. I designated this hidden region as the shadow. The shadow is not inherently evil or pathological. It is simply the sum total of everything the conscious ego has decided it cannot afford to be. For the individual whose survival once depended on being easy, agreeable, and emotionally undemanding, the shadow accumulates a specific and immense cargo: repressed anger, unexpressed resentment, and the legitimate, deeply human desire to be seen, not merely as useful, but as a complete human being with complex needs that may inconvenience others. You have felt the presence of this shadow, even if you lack the vocabulary to name it. It is the sudden, inexplicable irritation towards someone who has done nothing wrong, but who simply asked one more small favor on a day you were already spent. It is the disproportionate burst of rage over a minor inconvenience, followed immediately by profound shame because the reaction seemed to come out of nowhere. It is the pervasive flatness that descends after long periods of being good, a grey, lifeless numbness, as though an essential light within you was quietly extinguished. These are not signs of personal moral failure or emotional instability. They are the shadow finding its way through the cracks of a rigid persona. Neurosis, at its core, is a psychological self-division, a state of a psyche at war with itself, because the conscious mind insists on maintaining an idealized image that the unconscious completely refuses to ratify. The compulsively kind person is not at peace. They are actively managing a permanent, exhausting civil war within themselves. The bone-deep fatigue so many describe, the tiredness that weeks of sleep cannot fix, is not the physical exhaustion of doing too much. It is the profound energy drain of maintaining that internal war day after day. When this conflict remains unaddressed, the shadow seeks other exits. Psychosomatic ailments, mysterious depressions in people who appear loved and useful, or explosive emotional outbursts that feel completely alien to the conscious self. Those outbursts belong to the accumulated weight of every authentic response you deem too dangerous to express. Resentment is not a character flaw Tobe hidden away. It is a psychological compass. It points with extraordinary accuracy to the exact locations where your authentic self was forced to surrender to your persona. The next time you feel that low-grade irritation or that familiar tightening when a certain name appears on your phone, do not swallow it, and do not judge it. Sit with it quietly and ask, what truth was I forbidden to speak here? Resentment is not the disease, it is the alarm dot. It is your psyche marking the precise spot where the distance between who you are and who you perform has become unsustainable. What gets suppressed does not remain passive in the darkness. It actively shapes your behavior in ways your conscious mind never intended. Nowhere is this more crucial to comprehend than in the subtle ways the shadow of the excessively kind person inflicts harm while remaining entirely convinced of its own purity and innocence. There is a distinct category of emotional damage that only good people inflict. It is not the blatant injury of cruelty, which can be easily recognized and named. Nor is it the simple damage of selfishness, which at least declares its intentions openly. The damage caused by compulsive kindness is far more insidious, difficult to trace, and painful to recover from, precisely because it arrives cloaked in sacrifice, care, and the deep conviction that one is giving selflessly. The shadow is not what you think you are hiding. It is what you do not know you are hiding. Because the persona of absolute goodness is so invested in its own benevolence, it generates an unusually dense shadow, one that operates directly through the very actions the individual considers their highest virtues. Consider what compulsive kindness actually manifests within a relationship. It establishes an unviable dynamic. One person constantly yields, absorbs, accommodates, and smooths over friction. The other receives, yet often feels an underlying discomfort, because at a subconscious level, they sense that this giving is not entirely free. They feel an uncalculated debt accumulating between them, even if no words are spoken. The excessively kind individual would vehemently deny this, insisting they ask for nothing in return. But the hidden resentment reveals the truth. Resentment is the absolute proof of an unacknowledged transaction, the proof of a gift that was not, in truth, freely given. The shadow operates here not through direct aggression, but through an invisible emotional debt. It manifests as the heavy, silent pressure of accumulated sacrifice, which slowly transforms into a subtle claim on the other person, a claim expressed through quiet disappointment, sudden emotional withdrawal, or a pervasive atmosphere of martyr-like exhaustion. Furthermore, consider what compulsive kindness does to those on the receiving end. A person who never refuses, never pushes back, and never allows the honest friction of a genuine disagreement fails to offer others the gift of reality. They provide instead a polished mirror that reflects only what is comfortable, A child raised by an excessively accommodating parent learns unconsciously that their own raw emotions are too dangerous to be met directly, teaching them that love requires careful management rather than complete honesty. Similarly, a friend who constantly yields subtly conditions those around them to stop considering their boundaries, simply because no signal was ever sent that boundaries existed. The persona is ultimately a compromise between the individual and society regarding how one ought to appear. The individual who collapses completely into this compromise does not become selfless in a spiritual sense. They become, in a strict psychological sense, devoid of a self. And a person lacking a solid self cannot offer genuine human connection. They cannot provide the presence of a real other, someone with distinct edges, firm limits, and a personal perspective that sometimes resists, thereby validating that the relationship exists between two actual human beings, rather than a person and their own echo. This is a painful truth for the kindly masked individual to accept. Harm is often caused not by what is withheld, but by what is artificially performed. Unyielding availability, total accommodation, and the endless absorption of others' needs are not true gifts. They are the products of a persona so dominant that the authentic self behind it has been completely evacuated. And an evacuated self is incapable of real love. It can only operate functionally. Look honestly at a relationship where you are consistently the one who yields, adjusts, and smooths the waters. Ask yourself not what you are giving, but what you are withholding. What honest disagreement did you swallow? What necessary boundary did you fail to draw out of fear of conflict? What moment required your firm resistance, but received your passive compliance instead? These are not acts of genuine love. They are acts of subtle self-erasure masquerading as generosity. They deprive the other person of what they truly need. Your authentic, unvarnished presence. Yet, the ultimate cost of this compulsion is borne by the person performing it. What becomes of the soul that spends years pouring from a vessel that is never replenished? For the self that would need to receive nourishment was the very first thing you learned to abandon. Imagine a moment when someone who genuinely cares for you asks how you truly are, not as a polite formality, but with quiet, undivided attention. Notice the internal shift that occurs before you construct an answer. There is often a hesitation that tea is not thought, but an inward search, a reaching into the interior for something that ought to be immediately present, only to encounter dense fog. You know how you ought to feel. You know the socially appropriate answer. But the authentic, unperformed reality, the answer that requires you to know what you want, what you need, and what is indisputably true for you in this moment, is remarkably difficult to find. This is the severe psychological toll of an overdeveloped persona, the gradual erosion of your access to your own inner world. It is not a dramatic, sudden collapse, but a slow, silent accumulation of internal distance. Each time you suppress a genuine reaction to preserve the image of agreeable goodness, you place another layer of insulation between your conscious mind and your deeper psyche. Repeat this for years across every relationship and conflict, and that internal fog becomes your permanent baseline. Genuine psychological development demands absolute fidelity tied to the law of one's own being. This is not a selfish moral preference. It is an absolute psychological necessity. A person who abandons this fidelity becomes structurally selfless, without an active center. And what such a person brings to a relationship is not living presence, but mere function. Function is reliable, dutiful, and helpful. Function can read the room and anticipate every need with astonishing skill. But function is not true human contact. What your loved ones require from you is not your effortless utility, but your reality, the reassurance delivered through your genuine emotions, your firm limits, and your authentic reactions. They need to know they're interacting with a living soul, not a sophisticated mirror reflecting their own desires. When you offer care from an evacuated core, the recipient senses the hollow nature of the gift. The generosity feels oddly weightless. The agreement comes too effortlessly, and the warmth possesses a static quality that real, dynamic warmth never has. They sense that they are not truly meeting you. They are being gently managed by you. Relationships built upon this foundation may appear intimate on the surface, but beneath them lies an overwhelming, quiet loneliness. Ask yourself a question that most compulsively kind individuals find deeply uncomfortable. What do I actually want? Not what you are willing to tolerate, nor what would keep the peace, but what you authentically desire in this moment. If an answer does not come easily, that difficulty reveals everything. It means the persona has been answering on your behalf for so long that the authentic voice beneath it has faded to faint whisper. This is why the process of individuation, of becoming consciously and deliberately who you truly are, is not an indulgence. It is an urgent psychological imperative. Individuation is not self-absorbed optimization. It is the foundational requirement for authentic connection. You cannot offer real love to another while simultaneously erasing yourself to preserve their comfort. The self you have suppressed in the name of kindness is not an obstacle to love. It is the only instrument through which love can actually be expressed. How, then, does one begin to step out of this performance? How do you loosen the grip of a lifetime of conditioning without destroying your life in the process? Individuation is not a quick behavioral trick or a set of communication techniques. It requires obedience to the law of your own nature, a journey entered not with casual lightness, but out of a deep necessity, because the alternative of remaining severed from your own soul has finally become far more painful than the risk of being truly seen. This transformation begins internally with a shift in what you are willing to acknowledge about yourself. You do not transform by forcefully blurting out every blunt thought. You transform by cultivating uncompromising internal honesty about what is actually occurring within you, what you feel, what you need, and what you have spent years pretending not to notice. Begin with the quiet pause. When a request is made, use that brief silence not merely to check if your response is driven by fear, but to ask, what is my true, unedited feeling here? Allow that response to exist, even if only in the privacy of your own mind. Write it down or speak it aloud in solitude. The goal is to halt the process of self-erasure at its origin, making your truth real to yourself before you calculate how to navigate the outer world. A self that is routinely denied, even in private, will continue to fade away. Next, reframe your understanding of boundaries. The persona views a boundary as a cruel rejection or proof of selfishness. In truth, a boundary is an act of profound honesty that allows real relationship to exist. When you clearly communicate what you can or cannot give, you offer the other person something far more valuable than endless compliance, the truth of who you are. Real human beings, with their limits, refusals, and inconvenient needs, are the only ones capable of offering genuine love. Finally, you must transform your relationship with disapproval. The persona of excessive kindness was constructed precisely to eliminate the threat of disapproval. Consequently, the moment you begin to express your authentic self, you will inevitably encounter discomfort. Some individuals will dislike this shift, interpreting your new boundaries as coldness or selfishness. The development of a genuine personality is rarely praised by the collective. It is a departure from the comfortable expectations of the herd. Those who have continuously benefited from your complete self-abnegation will experience the loss of your persona as an inconvenience. Their disappointment is not proof that you are committing a moral wrong. It is evidence that something genuine is finally taking place. What changes when this shift occurs is not that you become hard or cruel. It is your fundamental relationship to your own existence. You cease viewing your authentic feelings as dangerous threats to be managed and begin treating them as vital intelligence to be trusted. A person who can listen to their own inner life without immediate suppression can finally give to others from a wellspring that is deep and real, rather than a wellspring of fear. Sit quietly with one final question, without rushing to dismiss it. If you were to set aside your constant utility, your total availability, your endless accommodation, and your infinite capacity to absorb the needs of others. What would remain of you? Do not treat this as a threat, but as a profound personal inquiry. Most who have anchored their worth in being safe and good for others have never dared to ask it, because the persona always answers before the soul can speak. The unlived life within you does not remain passive. It exerts continuous pressure, surfacing as physical symptoms, sudden bitterness, and the distinct poignant loneliness of being surrounded by people who rely on you, yet known intimately by none. You do not suffer from an excess of love. You suffer from a deficiency of self. That missing self cannot be recovered through intellectual insight alone. It requires an enduring loyalty to your own being, even when that loyalty collides with what others have come to expect from you. The persona loosens its grip slowly, and the repressed material beneath it, the long-buried anger, the grief, the unfulfilled desires, will surface before it finds integration. There will be moments that feel uncomfortable, even terrifying, as though you are becoming less virtuous rather than more whole. Yet, continuing to perform a life you do not truly inhabit is a slow, silent death of the spirit. What remains when the grand performance finally softens is not a void. It is something far quieter, infinitely more solid and vastly more durable than the pleasant warmth your persona learned to project. It is authentic presence. It is the quiet capacity to occupy a room without managing the emotions of everyone within it, to speak a quiet truth without calculating the fallout, and to receive genuine care without immediately deflecting it away out of fear. That is what true kindness is, not the compulsive submission that protects no one, but the profound grace that flows from a soul that is actually present, fully inhabited, and finally awake to its own existence. Throughout my long life, in the quiet solitude of my study in Küsnacht, I have sat across from countless souls, and so often I have observed a peculiar, heartbreaking tragedy, the person to whom everyone turns when their world fractures. You are the one who arrives without hesitation, who listens attentively, who finds a way to say yes even when every unspoken dimension of your inner being screams otherwise. You are remarkably easy to be around. You do not cause friction. Yet, beneath this pleasant exterior, there exists a heavy, nameless weight, a profound, quiet exhaustion that has nothing to do with physical labor and everything to do with how far you have traveled from your own center. You have likely called this trait sensitivity or empathy, or simply the fundamental nature of who you are. I would call it something else entirely. What if the very kindness you have built your identity around is not a moral virtue you voluntarily cultivated, but a survival strategy? A psychological adaptation forged so early, under such immense emotional pressure, that you can no longer distinguish between who you truly are and what you were forced to become? What if the version of you that never causes trouble, never demands too much, and never allows discomfort to show is not your character at all, but a mask so ancient that it has fused to your face? There is a precise reason it hurts in ways you cannot easily articulate to others. You feel a sudden surge of resentment that surfaces and then vanishes before you can properly analyze it. You experience an unexpected flash of anger that leaves you deeply ashamed. You carry the profound fatigue of being good, not the tiredness of doing too much, but the bone-deep exhaustion of an actor who has been performing for so long that he has forgotten he is standing on a stage. Do not expect standard self-help remedies here. I will not offer you 5 simple steps to set boundaries, nor will I instruct you to love yourself more, as if people-pleasing were merely a superficial habit to be swapped like a bad diet. That is a shallow understanding of the human psyche. What we are examining is the complex psychological architecture beneath excessive kindness, naming it with a cold, necessary precision, a hypertrophied persona in the service of fear. Not an excess of goodness, but the ingrained behaviors are those we absorbed before we even possessed the language to name them, before we could evaluate whether they were serving our growth or merely saving us from danger. In my psychological framework, the persona is not mere vanity or empty pretension. It is a necessary psychological structure, the functional face we develop in response to the demands of our environment. Every human being must possess one to navigate society. The danger arises not from the existence of the